"This is it," he said simply. He pushed open the cabin door, revealing a main room with a large stone fireplace, a sturdy table, and a dirt floor that was swept clean. A loft space was accessible by a ladder. "It will be tight until I add on. The loft is for the girls and you, Mary. The boys and I will make do down here." He showed them the woodpile, the pump, the root cellar. The children stared, wide-eyed, at their new world. The oldest boy, John, finally found his voice. "Mr. Ben," he asked, "what chores need doing first?" Ben looked at John, then at the others, their faces now alight with a fragile hope. He saw not a burden, but a crew. He saw not chaos, but the possibility of a family. A faint, almost invisible softening touched the corners of his eyes. "The first chore," Ben said, "is to get a fire going and warm this house up. The second is to see what we can make for supper." He looked at Mary, including her in the unspoken pact. "We'll manage. One day at a time." As the children scurried to carry firewood, their voices, hesitant at first, beginning to fill the mountain air, Ben and Mary stood for a moment by the wagon. The immensity of what he had done, of what they were both embarking upon, hung between them. "Thank you," Mary said again, her voice thick. "You saved us. I don't know why you did it." Ben looked out over his land, now suddenly alive with new sounds and movement. He thought of the silent years, of the things that were broken that could not be fixed with a hammer and nails. He met her gaze. "Every living thing needs a place to put down roots," he said quietly. "This land had space. That's all." But as he turned to unload the wagon, Mary suspected it was much more than that. And the story of the mountain cowboy whose choice stunned the West was just beginning. Winter descended on the high meadow with a fierce, silent authority. It began with a skiff of snow that dusted the peaks like sugar, and within weeks, the world was reduced to a monochrome of white land, dark green pine, and iron-gray sky. The isolation was total, a vast quiet broken only by the wind's moan and the crackle of their own fire. For Ben and his unexpected family, this season of seclusion became a forge, testing and shaping their new lives together. The initial practicality of survival left little room for awkwardness. Ben's prediction proved true. The single-room cabin was painfully tight for 9 people. At night, the space transformed into a patchwork of sleeping rolls. Mary and the 4 girls, Lily, Grace, Anna, and the quiet middle sister, Emma, took the loft, their whispers floating down like soft secrets. Ben and the 3 boys, John, Sam, and little Tom, bedded down near the hearth. The closeness bred a kind of raw intimacy, where every sigh and sniffle was shared. Ben was a man of action, not words. His teaching was through demonstration. He showed John, whose 12-year-old arms were thin but willing, how to split wood so the axe wouldn't stick, and how to bank the fire so it would last the night. He guided Sam's small hands in milking the patient cow, and he sat with Tom on his knee, showing him how to whittle a simple peg from a scrap of pine. For the girls, he was more circumspect, leaving bolts of sturdy cloth and a basket of sewing notions where Mary would find them, or demonstrating how to safely trim a lantern wick. Mary was the steady heart of the cabin's new rhythm. She organized their meager possessions with a fierce efficiency, devised a rotating chore chart, and managed their stores with an eye that calculated the distance to spring. She cooked simple, filling meals on the cast-iron stove, bean soups, cornbread, stews thickened with the last of the root vegetables. She and Ben spoke in a shorthand of necessity. "The north pasture fence line is sagging," he'd say over breakfast. "The boys will need their heaviest socks today," she'd reply, handing him a tin of coffee. Yet, beneath the surface of shared labor, a deep current of unspoken history flowed. Ben never spoke of his past. The children, initially wary of the large, quiet man, began to thaw. Little Lily, in particular, adopted him. She would toddle after him as he did his outside chores, a small bundle of furs, offering him imaginary cups of tea made from snow. One bitter afternoon, Ben came in from checking his trapline to find her waiting by the door, her cloth doll in hand. "Mr. Ben," she declared, holding up the doll. "Dolly's arm is poorly. Can you fix it?" The boys stopped their game of checkers. Mary paused in her mending. They all watched, wondering how this serious man would respond to a child's whimsy. Ben knelt, his big hands making the doll seem tiny. He examined the loose stitch at the shoulder with exaggerated gravity. A clean break. No sawbone needed. He took the doll to his workbench, found a needle and thread from Mary's basket, and with a surgeon's concentration, sewed 3 small, perfect stitches. He handed it back. There. Good as new. Tell her to take it easy for a day or 2. Lily beamed, clutching the doll to her chest. Thank you, Dr. Ben. From that day, he was no longer Mr. Ben to the little ones. He was simply Ben. The first true crisis came not from without, but from within. Young Sam, a dreamy boy of 9, had been tasked with fetching water from the creek each morning. One frigid day, he slipped on an ice-sheathed rock and plunged his leg into the freezing water up to his knee. He came hobbling back, sobbing, his boot and pants leg instantly stiffening. Panic flashed in Mary's eyes. Frostbite could mean losing a foot, or worse. Ben moved quickly and calmly. He carried Sam to the hearth, stripped off the frozen garments, and examined the boy's pale, cold foot. We need snow, he instructed John. A bucket of fresh, clean snow. While Mary stoked the fire, Ben gently, methodically, began to rub Sam's foot and leg with handfuls of snow, a frontier remedy to restore circulation slowly and prevent tissue damage. He worked in silence, his touch firm yet careful, until the skin flushed pink and Sam's tears subsided into hiccups. Hurts, Sam whimpered. Feeling is good, Ben said, his voice low. No feeling is what we fear. He wrapped the foot in a clean, woolen cloth. You'll be fine. But no more solo trips to the creek when there's ice, we go together. That night, as Sam slept nestled near the fire, Mary sought Ben's eyes across the room. Thank you, she murmured. It was no longer a thank you for the roof, but for the care, for the quiet competence that had protected her child. As the weeks wore on, the cabin walls seemed to expand. Laughter, once rare and startled, became a more frequent visitor. John mastered a simple tune on a harmonica Ben produced from a trunk. The girls put on a puppet show with socks and buttons, their silhouettes dancing on the wall. Ben began to tell stories, not personal ones, but tales of the land, of animals he'd seen, of weather signs read in the clouds. The children listened, rapt. One evening, after the younger ones were asleep in the loft, Ben was working on a new design, plans to add 2 lean-to bedrooms come spring. Mary sat nearby, darning a pile of socks. The fire popped and settled. You never asked, Mary said softly, not looking up from her work. About their father. About how we came to be on that platform. Ben kept his eyes on his charcoal sketch of a joint. A man's past is his own. If you wish to tell it, I'll listen. If not, it changes nothing here. The permission in his words opened a door. She spoke quietly of a fisherman lost in a storm, of a slow slide into poverty in a noisy, uncaring city, of her mother's illness, and of her own desperate vow to keep her family together. I thought the train would be our chance. But no one wanted a set. We were inconvenient. Ben put down his charcoal. He looked at the sleeping boys, at the ladder to the loft where the girls dreamed. This life out here, he said, gesturing to the dark window, is built on inconveniences. A broken axle 10 miles from nowhere. A late blizzard. A sick animal. You don't face them alone if you're smart. You build a crew. He met her gaze. You 7. You're the strongest crew I've ever seen. A warmth that had nothing to do with the fireplace spread through Mary's chest. For the first time since her father's boat had failed to return, she felt not like a burden, but like a part of something sturdy and good. The deepest change, however, was in Ben himself. The profound silence that had been his companion for years was gone, replaced by a different, richer quiet, one filled with the sounds of life he had not known he was missing. The weight of the children's trust, of Mary's steady partnership, settled onto his shoulders not as a chain, but as an anchor. He found himself noticing the progress of a squirrel's nest, not just for his own interest, but to show it to Tom. He saved the sweetest apple from the cellar for Lily. He started leaving his worn copy of Pilgrim's Progress on the table, knowing John would pick it up and puzzle through it. The mountain cowboy who had stunned the West with his choice was being quietly, irrevocably transformed by the consequences of it. The cabin was no longer just a shelter, it was becoming a home. But the true test of this fragile new world was still to come. The world outside Bitter Creek had not forgotten the astonishing event at the depot. Whispers had traveled down the mountain trails and into the wider territory, growing and distorting with each telling. And spring, when it finally broke the grip of winter, would bring more than just thawing earth and green shoots. It would bring the outside world knocking on their door. Spring did not come gently to the high meadow. It arrived as a slow, muddy struggle, a battle between retreating frost and the sun's new strength. For Ben and his family, the thaw meant freedom and frantic work. The boys helped him repair the winter-ravaged fences and prepare the rocky soil for a kitchen garden Mary planned. The girls scattered seed for the chickens and helped air out the cabin's winter-stale contents. Life was a symphony of purposeful noise. It was during this busy season that the outside world found them. The first visitor was Sheriff Roy, his horse picking its way carefully up the softened trail. He came under the pretext of checking on the county's newest, largest family, but his eyes were curious, scanning the homestead with clear surprise. He saw not a scene of miserable overcrowding, but order. The woodpile was neat and high. The children, though dressed in patched clothes, were clean and busy. John was fixing a hinge on the chicken coop under Ben's watchful eye. Mary stood in the doorway, a baby goat, a recent gift from Ben to Lily, nuzzling her hand. "Well, I'll be," Roy said, dismounting and tipping his hat to Mary. "Place looks prosperous, Ben." "We manage," Ben said, his tone neutral but not unwelcoming. He offered the sheriff a cup of coffee by the outdoor fire pit. Roy accepted, making small talk about the hard winter. Then, casually, he ventured, "Hear some talk down in Bitter Creek. Some folks are mighty curious about your arrangement." He glanced at Mary, who had gone inside but was listening from the open window. "A single man, a single woman, all those children. Makes tongues wag, you understand." Ben's gaze, usually calm, turned as hard as flint. He set his own cup down slowly. "The arrangement is they have a home. The talk is not my concern, Roy. Nor is it yours, unless it breaks a law." Roy held up a placating hand. "Now, don't get bristly. I'm just telling you what's on the wind. There's another kind of talk, too. From farther afield." He leaned in slightly. "A man from Cheyenne came through last week. Asking about you. Asking if it was true that Ben, the mountain man, took on a whole orphan train set. Seemed real interested." A cold knot formed in Ben's stomach, but his face showed nothing. "What business is it of his?" "Didn't say," Roy shrugged. "But he wore a city suit and carried a ledger book. Didn't look like the type for casual social calls." He finished his coffee and stood. "You've done a good thing here, Ben. It's plain to see. But good things sometimes draw attention you don't want. You keep your eyes open." After the sheriff's dust had settled down the trail, the easy spring air felt charged with a new tension. Ben worked with renewed, silent intensity. He began taking the older boys with him when he checked his more distant trap lines, teaching them not just to track game, but to scan the horizon, to notice broken branches or unfamiliar footprints. He moved his best rifle from its rack to a place near the door. Mary saw the change in him. One evening, as they stood looking at the first stars over the darkening peaks, she asked quietly, "Who do you think the man from Cheyenne was?" Ben was silent for a long moment. Could be nothing. Could be a reporter looking for a story. Could be, he hesitated, someone from an orphanage board, checking on their investment. Or it could be something else. Something else. Mary pressed, worry threading her voice. Ben's jaw tightened. "A man with a ledger book is usually counting money, Mary. Children, especially older children who can work, have a value to some people. A value on paper." The implication hung in the air, ugly and frightening. The idea that their hard-won peace, this family forged in winter's crucible, could be seen as a commodity, a ledger entry to be disputed, was a threat colder than any blizzard. The threat materialized 2 weeks later. His name was Mr. Lowell. He arrived in a hired buggy, his suit impeccably dusty, a crisp document case on the seat beside him. He was a small, precise man with eyes that darted around the homestead like accounting for inventory. Ben met him at the edge of the yard, his arms crossed. Mary stayed on the porch, the children clustered behind her like a fortress wall. "Mr. Ben Walker?" Lowell's voice was clipped, Eastern. I am representing the Northeastern Children's Aid and Placement Society," he announced, as if the title itself carried authority. "I have come regarding the minors John, Samuel, Thomas, Grace, Anna, Emma, and Lily Clark, placed provisionally in your care last autumn." "They're not provisional," Ben said, his voice low. "They're home." Lowell afforded a thin smile. Be that as it may, the placement was highly irregular. A single man, unchaperoned, with an unrelated female of marrying age under the same roof? It is not a suitable environment by the society's standards. Furthermore, our records indicate interest from several upstanding, two-parent families in Kansas and Iowa for subsets of these children. The separation was always the intended outcome. The train conductor's sentimentality in allowing them to remain together was a regrettable error. Mary's hand flew to her mouth, a stifled gasp. Little Lily buried her face in Mary's skirts. John stepped forward, his young face pale but defiant. "We ain't going. We're a family. You are children, and the society is tasked with deciding your best interests," Lowell said dismissively. He opened his case, pulling out official-looking papers. "Mr. Walker, you have no legal standing. The children are wards of the society until they are formally adopted. I am here to collect them and transport them to a receiving home, where they will be properly processed and placed." The spring sun shone brightly, but a shadow had fallen over the meadow. Ben felt a familiar, dangerous stillness settle within him, the calm before a storm. He looked past Lowell to the terrified faces of his children. His children. The word echoed in his soul with a truth that obliterated all paperwork. "You're mistaken," Ben said, his words dropping like stones. "I have the documentation right here," Lowell began. "I don't care about your papers," Ben interrupted, his voice still quiet but now carrying the weight of the mountains behind it. "You see that woman? Those children? They are not a set of goods to be processed. They have a home. They have responsibilities. They are loved. They stay." Lowell's composure cracked into irritation. "This is not a negotiation, sir. I have the law on my side. If you do not comply, I will return with the county magistrate and the territorial marshal. You will lose them, and you may face charges of interference and abduction." The ultimatum echoed in the clear air. Ben took a single step forward. He did not raise his voice, but something in his demeanor, the set of his shoulders, the ice in his eyes, made the smaller man take an involuntary step back towards his buggy. "Then you do that," Ben said. "You bring your magistrate. You bring your marshal. You bring every piece of paper from here to Boston. But you will not take one step toward that porch today. And when you come back, you will find that this is no longer just about your papers and their rules." He gestured to the land around them, the sturdy cabin, the tended fields, the children standing firm. "This is our home. We have built it with these hands. And a man has a right to defend his home and his family. That is a law older than any of yours." The two men locked eyes. Lowell saw not the bluster of a backwoodsman, but the unshakable resolve of bedrock. He saw the unified fear and defiance on the porch. He calculated the distance to town, the potential for an ugly, physical scene here and now. He snapped his case shut. "This is not over, Mr. Walker," he hissed, his face flushed with impotent anger. "You will hear from the authorities within the week." He climbed hastily into his buggy, turned the horse with a sharp jerk, and fled down the mountain. Silence returned, heavy and thick. Ben turned slowly to face his family. The children stared at him, their eyes huge. Mary's face was streaked with tears, but she stood straight. Ben walked to the porch. He knelt, bringing himself to eye level with the children. His voice was rough with emotion. "Listen to me. No one is taking you anywhere. Not while I have breath in my body. Do you understand?" They nodded, a flock of small, serious birds. "But," he continued, "he will be back. And he will bring trouble with him. We have to be ready. We have to be smarter." He looked at Mary, a world of apology and determination in his gaze. "I'm sorry this has come to us." Mary wiped her cheeks. She looked at the man who had chosen them, who was now willing to fight the world for them. The last barrier in her heart crumbled. "Don't be sorry," she said, her voice firming. "We face it together. As a crew." That night, plans were made not for planting, but for a different kind of survival. Ben would ride to Bitter Creek at first light to send a telegraph, a desperate, expensive message to a retired judge he'd once done a great service for, a man who lived 300 miles away. It was a thin thread of hope. John and Mary would be in charge, with a rifle and strict instructions. The children were drilled on what to do if strangers came. As Ben prepared to leave in the cold dawn, Mary stopped him at the door. Without a word, she reached up and gently straightened his collar, a simple, domestic gesture that spoke volumes. "Come back to us, Ben," she whispered. He placed his large hand over hers for a brief moment. "I will. This is my home, too." He rode out, the fate of his family balanced on the slim chance of distant help and his own unwavering will. The mountain cowboy had made his choice. Now, he would have to fight for it. The peace of the meadow was shattered, and the final, decisive battle for their future was just over the horizon. Ben rode hard for Bitter Creek, the drum of hoofbeats echoing the frantic rhythm of his heart. The world had narrowed to the trail ahead and the faces he'd left behind on the porch. Mary's steady gaze, John's attempt at a manly nod, the younger one's wide, trusting eyes. In town, he bypassed the curious stares and went straight to the telegraph office. He composed the most important message of his life, a plea for help to Judge Henry Morrison, a man of principle who owed Ben his life after a long-ago incident with a broken wagon axle and a band of highwaymen. The message was costly and blunt. Family in peril stop, legal threat TO remove, children stop, need guidance, and any influence stop. The operator, an old man named Walter, read the slip and let out a low whistle. "This Judge Morrison, he the one from the Capitol?" "He is," Ben said, counting out the silver. "Wires are slow, Ben. And a judge is a powerful man to call on. You sure about this storm you're stirring?" "The storm came to my door, Walter," Ben replied, his tone leaving no room for debate. "Just send it." With the message crackling its way into the uncertain distance, Ben did the only other thing he could. He went to Sheriff Roy. He found him in his office, cleaning a rifle. "He came," Ben stated without preamble. Roy sighed, setting the rifle down. "Lowell. He's fetching a magistrate and a marshal. Says they'll be here within the week to take the children." Roy rubbed his jaw, looking troubled. "Ben, if he's got the paperwork from that society, the law might be on his side. A single man, no legal adoption. It don't sit right, but a territorial magistrate might see it as clear-cut." Ben leaned on the desk, his palms flat. "Roy, look at me. Those children aren't just boarders. Mary isn't just a housekeeper. That meadow is their home. They've planted their hearts there. I am asking you, as the law here in Bitter Creek, where it matters, to see that. I'm not asking you to break the law. I'm asking you to see there's a higher one." Roy held his friend's desperate, earnest gaze. He'd seen the change in Ben over the winter, glimpsed the life on that homestead. He'd also seen Lowell's type before, men who saw people as entries in a ledger. "I can't stop a territorial marshal, Ben. But I can be there when he comes. And I can bear witness to what you've built. That's all I can promise." It was more than Ben had hoped for. He bought extra supplies, flour, beans, coffee, and turned his horse for home, the weight of the coming confrontation heavy upon him. Back at the meadow, the home had become a fortress of anxious preparation. Mary had the children practice a signal, 3 quick knocks followed by 2 slow ones, for safety. She stored extra water and made sure the rifle was loaded and that John understood, with a solemn terror, when it would and would not be right to use it. The little ones felt the fear in the air and stayed close, their games now hushed and played within sight of the cabin door. 3 days after Ben's return, the lookout came. Young Sam, posted in the crook of a tall pine with a spyglass Ben had traded for, gave a sharp, bird-like whistle. 3 riders were coming up the trail. Not just Lowell and a lawman. 3. Ben took a deep, steadying breath. He met Mary's eyes. Stay inside with the little ones. John, with me. The boy, trying to hide his trembling, followed Ben out onto the porch. The party reined in before the yard. There was Mr. Lowell, looking vindicatively smug. Next to him was a stern-faced man with a silver star pinned to his coat, Marshal Grant. The third man, older with sharp eyes and a neat beard, wore a suit and carried a leather-bound book. The magistrate. Benjamin Walker, Marshal Grant said, his voice officious. This is Magistrate Cartwright. We are here on official business regarding the wards of the Northeastern Children's Aid Society. Mr. Lowell has presented compelling evidence of an improper placement. You are ordered to surrender the children into his custody for lawful relocation. Ben stood firm, John a rigid statue beside him. The children are home, Marshal. They are not wards. They are family. By what legal instrument? Magistrate Cartwright asked, his voice cool. Show me the adoption papers. I don't have papers, Ben admitted, his heart sinking. I have a home. I have their sweat in this soil. I have their trust. Sentiment does not supersede statute, Mr. Walker, Cartwright said, not unkindly but with finality. The society has lawful authority. My duty is to see it enforced. Lowell couldn't contain his triumph. You see, it is as I said. A hopelessly irregular situation. He made to dismount. Children, come out now. Your time of inconvenience is over. Stay where you are. Ben's voice roared across the clearing, surprising even himself. It was the sound of a mountain cracking. Lowell froze, 1 foot out of the stirrup. The marshal's hand moved to his gun belt. It was then that Sheriff Roy emerged from the tree line at the edge of the property, his horse walking slowly. He had been there, unseen, all along. He nodded to the marshal and magistrate. Gentlemen, thought I should be present, as this homestead falls under my watch. Your presence is noted, Sheriff, Marshal Grant said, eyeing him. Perhaps you can help persuade your citizen to comply peacefully. I've seen this situation develop, Roy said, riding forward. I saw these children when they had no hope on that platform. I see them now. This isn't a matter of lawbreaking. It's a matter of what's right. Right is determined by the court, not sentiment, Magistrate Cartwright reiterated, though he was now watching the cabin door. It opened. Mary stepped out, not with the children, but alone. She walked to stand beside Ben, facing the mounted men. Her voice, clear and strong, carried in the quiet meadow. Your honors, sir. I am Mary Clark. These children are my blood. When there was no one, Ben Walker gave us not just shelter, but a family. He has been more of a father to them in these months than any paper could ever decree. If you take them, you are not saving them from an irregular situation. You are tearing them from their father's arms. Her words, raw and true, hung in the air. Even Lowell looked momentarily shaken. But he pressed on. A pretty speech. But the law is the law. Magistrate, I insist. A new sound cut him off. The distant but unmistakable rhythm of a fast-approaching horse. All heads turned. A rider came around the bend, pushing his lathered horse hard. He was an older man, his clothes dusty but fine, his bearing one of undeniable authority. He reined in, his sharp eyes taking in the tense scene. "Judge Morrison," Ben breathed, a surge of wild hope flooding his chest. The magistrate's eyes widened. "Judge Henry Morrison? Of the 3rd Territorial Circuit." "The same," the old judge said, dismounting stiffly. He glanced at the telegram crumpled in his hand. "Received a rather urgent wire." He looked at Ben, a flicker of recognition and respect in his gaze, then turned his formidable attention to Magistrate Cartwright and Marshal Grant. "It seems I have arrived at a proceeding. Please, Cartwright, enlighten me as to the matter at hand." As Cartwright summarized the case, Judge Morrison listened, his expression inscrutable. He looked at the sturdy cabin, the well-kept yard, the garden where green shoots were breaking the earth. He looked at Ben and Mary, standing together in silent solidarity, and at John's pale, brave face. He looked at the children's faces now peeking, one by one, from the cabin window. When Cartwright finished, Judge Morrison was silent for a long moment. He walked over to the porch, ignoring Lowell completely. He looked at little Lily, who had come to cling to Mary's leg. "Child," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle, "where is your home?" Lily pointed a tiny finger at Ben, then at the cabin, then at the whole meadow. "Here," she said simply. Judge Morrison nodded. He turned back to the group. "The law exists to serve justice and protect the vulnerable. I have reviewed the relevant statutes, prompted by my urgent correspondence." He shot a look at Ben. "The Northeastern Children's Aid Society has standing, it is true. However, territorial law also provides for the recognition of de facto guardianship in cases where the welfare and stability of the child are demonstrably served, particularly when bloodkin are present and consenting." He faced Magistrate Cartwright. "You have before you a blood sister, of age, who consents to and participates in this guardianship. You have a man who has provided not merely shelter, but a moral, stable and loving home, a fact attested to by your own sheriff. You have children who clearly view this as their permanent family. To remove them now would be an act of profound cruelty, not charity. It would be a failure of the law's higher purpose." He drew himself up. "As a senior judge of this territory, I strongly advise, Magistrate Cartwright, that you use your discretion to recognize Benjamin Walker as the legal guardian of these children, with Mary Clark's full consent and partnership. I will file the necessary orders to make it formal. The irregularity can be corrected with ink, not with trauma." The silence that followed was absolute. Lowell's face went from smug to ashen. Magistrate Cartwright looked from the fierce hope on the porch to the imposing certainty of Judge Morrison, and then to the nodding, relieved face of Sheriff Roy. He closed his leather book with a definitive snap. "The court," he said, "recognizes the wisdom of your counsel, Judge Morrison. The children shall remain. Mr. Walker, you will present yourself in Bitter Creek within the month to formalize the guardianship. This matter is concluded." Marshal Grant, seeing the direction of the wind, simply tipped his hat and turned his horse. Lowell spluttered. "But, the society, my expenses." "Your expenses are not the concern of this territory's courts," Judge Morrison said coldly. "I suggest you depart, sir, before I consider a charge of frivolous agitation." Defeated, Lowell scrambled onto his horse and fled, his dream of ledger book justice crumbling. As the other riders turned to leave, Judge Morrison approached Ben. He placed a hand on his shoulder. "You called. I came. That square is now settled, Ben." He gave a small, rare smile. "You've built something fine here. Protect it." And then, they were alone. The threat had dissolved like mist in the morning sun. Ben felt the tension drain from him, leaving a profound, trembling relief. He turned to Mary. The words he had never spoken, the truth that had grown as surely as the crops, finally found their moment. "Mary," he said, his voice thick. "This family, it needs to be whole in every way the world sees. Not just in our hearts." He took her hands in his. Would you do me the honor of making me their father in name, as well as in deed? Will you marry me? Tears streamed down Mary's face, but they were tears of joy, the first pure joy she had known in years. She looked at the children now spilling out of the cabin, their faces alight with understanding and hope. She looked at this strong, quiet, extraordinary man who had chosen them against all odds and fought the world to keep them. Yes, Ben, she said. Yes. With all my heart. The children erupted in cheers, swarming around them. John pumped Ben's hand. Sam whooped. The girls hugged Mary's waist. Little Lily jumped up and down, chanting, Papa Ben! Papa Ben! That summer, the meadow saw not just a wedding, but a true beginning. The story of the mountain cowboy's choice, once a tale of stunned curiosity, became a legend of unwavering love and the fierce defense of family. And in the solid, spacious cabin that now stood in the meadow, filled with the noise and warmth of a chosen family, Ben finally found the silence he had never been looking for, the deep, contented quiet of a heart that is truly, completely home.